Welcome back to Forbidden Realms, where we peel back the curtain on the darkest chapters of human history. Imagine a time when doctors drilled holes into skulls to let out demons, when patients were strapped to tables, injected with deadly chemicals, all in the name of science. What you're about to hear isn't horror fiction. It's the real history of medicine, and it's terrifying. This is the story of how curiosity, desperation, and blind ambition led to some of the most disturbing medical experiments ever recorded. Let's begin our descent. In ancient times, illness wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. Ancient Egyptians believed that disease came from angry gods or malevolent spirits. Their treatments, strange concoctions, spells, even animal dung inserted into body cavities to purge evil. It sounds absurd now, but it was science to them. Then came the Greeks, revered for their rationalism. Yet even Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine, endorsed bloodletting, draining people's blood to balance their bodily humors. This would continue for centuries, killing more than it ever cured. Fast forward to the Middle Ages. Surgeons operated with bare hands, in candlelit rooms, unconscious patients. There was no anesthesia, only screams. Trepanning, where a hole was drilled into the skull to relieve mental illness or headaches, was commonplace. Many didn't survive. Those who did were never the same. By the 17th and 18th centuries, medicine took a darker turn. As curiosity about human anatomy exploded, grave robbing became a booming industry. Medical schools paid men to dig up fresh corpses so students could dissect them. Some body snatchers went further, murdering the poor and unwanted to meet demand. In the 19th century, asylum doctors began experimenting on mentally ill patients without consent. Women were especially vulnerable. Diagnosed with hysteria, a vague term used to describe almost any emotional behavior, they were subjected to ice baths, genital massages, and electric shocks. These weren't fringe treatments, they were mainstream medicine. Then came the Victorian era, obsessed with morality and control. Masturbation was seen as a disease. Doctors built torture devices to stop children and adults from touching themselves. Spiked rings, chastity belts, even surgical removal of genitals, all justified as medical care. At the turn of the 20th century, eugenics swept through Europe and America. Scientists claimed they could improve the human race by eliminating the weak. In the US, thousands were sterilized without their knowledge, often poor women, immigrants, and people with disabilities. They were told it was for their health. It was a lie. And then there were the infamous syphilis experiments in Tuskegee. From 1932 to 1972, hundreds of black men were deliberately left untreated to study the disease's effects. Even when penicillin became available, they were denied it. They were lied to, tracked like lab rats, and allowed to die slow, agonizing deaths. In Nazi Germany, science lost its soul entirely. Doctors became in concentration camps. They froze prisoners alive, infected them with malaria, performed amputations without anesthesia. Twins were especially prized, dissected for comparison. These atrocities weren't done in secret. They were. Japan's Unit 731 was no better. During World War II, Japanese doctors in China conducted experiments so grotesque they're rarely spoken of today. Forced infections, limbs removed and reattached. Randomly, thousands died. No one was ever punished. In Cold War America, the line between science and sadism blurred again. The CIA launched Project MKUltra, a secret program testing mind-control drugs like LSD on unsuspecting civilians. Some participants were driven to madness. Others died by suicide. All were expendable in the name of national security. But not all horrors were done in labs or basements. In the 1950s, lobotomies were performed by the tens of thousands. Doctors would hammer ice picks into patients' eye sockets, severing connections in the brain. It was hailed as a miracle cure for depression and anxiety. In reality, it turned many into silent, drooling shells. Children weren't spared either. In the 1960s, autistic kids were subjected to electric shock therapy and isolation chambers, all to force them to act normal. They weren't treated as children, they were test subjects. In some hospitals, the practice of insulin coma therapy was common. Doctors would inject psychiatric patients with massive doses of insulin until they fell into comas, then revive them. It was dangerous, unpredictable, and often fatal, but it was celebrated. By the 1970s, the medical world faced a reckoning. Investigative journalism and whistleblowers exposed the extent of the abuse. Ethics boards were created, informed consent became law, but for tens of thousands of victims, it was too late. Even today, the scars remain. The legacy of these experiments lives on in the mistrusts some communities feel toward medicine, and for good reason. But perhaps the most chilling truth is this. Every one of these acts was done in the name of progress, of science, of healing. They thought they were helping. History teaches us that cruelty can wear a lab coat, that the line between treatment and torture is thinner than we like to believe. So next time you walk into a doctor's office, remember, it wasn't always this way. And this is only the beginning. Let's go deeper. While the world has moved forward in many ways, some practices persist under new names, or in new countries. Take forced sterilization. Long considered a thing of the past, but reports from the early 2000s show it was still being conducted on indigenous women in Canada, undocumented women in US detention centers, and marginalized groups across parts of Asia and Africa. It's ongoing abuse. Then there's medical testing on prisoners, a long-ignored chapter. In the 20th century, inmates were injected with chemical agents, exposed to radiation, and subjected to drug trials, often without consent. The justification: they were seen as disposable. Even in beauty and pharmaceutical industries, horrific trials took place. In the 1950s, thalidomide was marketed as a miracle drug for morning sickness. It was never fully tested. The result: over 10,000 babies born with deformities. No one was held accountable. In mental institutions worldwide, electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, was, and still is, used on vulnerable patients. Though modern ECT is regulated, early versions were barbaric. High-voltage shocks, no anesthesia, no memory of what came after. And what about orphans? In state-run institutions from the UK to the US, countless children were used as subjects for vaccine trials, radiation exposure, and psychological tests. Many were never told. In the Soviet Union, political dissidents were falsely diagnosed with mental illness and imprisoned in psychiatric hospitals. These were not places of healing. They were torture chambers, padded cells, ice baths, constant sedation. It was medicine used as punishment. And here's something truly twisted. In the 20th century, doctors experimented with transplanting animal organs into humans. From monkey glands to pig hearts, patients were mutilated in the name of science fiction dreams. Most didn't survive, but the experiments continued. The dark truth is this: when desperation meets ambition, science can become a monster. Even now, ethical lines are constantly tested. Stem cell research, gene editing. As technology advances, the potential for abuse grows. Who gets to decide what's ethical? Where do we draw the line between cure and control? This isn't just history. It's a warning. And there's more. In the early 2000s, pharmaceutical companies began testing experimental drugs in developing nations, often without proper oversight. In Nigeria, a controversial meningitis drug trial by a major corporation led to deaths and disabilities among children. Consent forms were questionable, and many families were unaware their children were test subjects. In India, reports emerged of unethical clinical trials on the poor, with drugs being tested without fully informing participants of risks. These are the new frontiers of experimentation, hidden beneath the veil of development and aid. Meanwhile, military experiments have continued in secrecy. From sound weapons and psychological warfare to testing sleep deprivation and extreme environmental exposure, soldiers have often been used as involuntary guinea pigs. Biological warfare research is another dark underbelly. The development of weaponized anthrax, plague, and engineered viruses has often involved testing on animals, and, in some cases, on unsuspecting people. The line between defense and offense blurs dangerously. Organ trade and illegal transplants also deserve a chilling mention. In some regions, organs are harvested from prisoners, the poor, or political dissidents, often under duress or false pretenses. Medicine, in these cases, becomes a tool of exploitation. There's also the horrifying case of Henrietta Lacks in 1951. Cells taken from her without consent became the foundation of modern medical breakthroughs. The healer cell line, her family was never informed or compensated. Her legacy is a reminder that even progress can have a human cost. In psychiatric history, the Rosenhan experiment exposed the fragility of psychiatric diagnosis. Healthy individuals feigned symptoms and were admitted to institutions. Some weren't released for weeks, even after acting completely normal. It raised deep questions about how we define and treat mental illness. Forced conversion therapy, often masquerading as medical or psychological treatment, was inflicted on LGBTQ individuals throughout the 20th century. From electroshock to aversion therapy, these practices left lasting trauma, all under the pretense of healing. And in recent decades, data-driven medicine has introduced new concerns. Algorithms used to determine treatment plans or insurance coverage have shown racial and economic bias, leading to unequal care. A new kind of medical experimentation, silent, invisible, and algorithmic, is taking shape. Artificial intelligence, predictive genetics, brain-machine interfaces all represent the new frontier of medical science. But without robust ethics, today's innovation could become tomorrow's horror story. So what do we do with this knowledge? We remember. We question. We demand transparency. Because the past isn't as far behind us as we'd like to believe. Thank you for joining Forbidden Realms. This has been our longest and darkest descent yet, and we've only scratched the surface. Subscribe to uncover the forgotten, the forbidden, and the fearsome truths of history, because some wounds don't heal.